really knowing she was going to do it. So, like, and now people know about it. We've already moved, changed our names. We've moved 6 times in a year because of the harassment from people saying that Nicole helped Chris Watts, from people who just want to know this case, who want to meet people, whatever. Okay? Nicole didn't kill anyone. Chris Watts, and Chris Watts alone, murdered his family. Chris Watts didn't have help. He didn't have encouragement. And we got his law. He's got lawyers. He had lawyers before. They kept contacting everybody, because he wants to talk to Nikki about the baby, okay? So he has lawyers now because they contacted a few days ago, and that's what set my mom off. My mother is 63 years old, okay? And, she's mentally ill, okay? She's mentally ill, and, she really, can't take all this harassment and all this shit, okay? But she wanted to, rebuttal what she was seeing on, YouTube and all that shit, because, the reason that Chris Watts agreed to do a book with Cheryl is because Cheryl was supposed to give money to Nicole. Cheryl never gave any money to Nicole or my mom or anything like that. Because she got sued for plagiarism. Cheryl contacted Chris for a second book and, said she would give the money to Nicole. Chris said no, because she didn't give the money to Nicole because of what happened before, and she plagiarized the book. Then he had his new lawyers reach out again, because the lawyers, they were reaching out early from day one, and then they stopped, and then the lawyers started reaching out again, not a month ago, and then they called, and they set my mom off and all that. My mom is suing a couple of YouTube channels for all the harassment of me, her, Nikki. Nikki is suing, but we don't know. Okay, look. Chris Watts himself has written us and told us he doesn't know why he killed his family. He says that he was possessed by a demon from the house. He says that the Thrive patches were making him think demonic thoughts. Chris killed his family because he's a sick fuck. That's the reason he killed his family. It could have easily been Nikki. Well, what do you think would have happened if the plan would have worked? He would have killed her too. He took his bodies to the job, okay? He took the bodies to Anadarko. How fucking dumb can he get? He wanted to get caught. He was going to be killing. In fact, Nikki turned him in. She called the police when she seen the interview, because she said he looked like a fucking serial killer. Okay? And she thought, what if he was a serial killer? Because there was a woman missing from Brighton. But the Kessinger family did not kill anyone. Christopher Watts killed. That's it. We have... Oh, and the Watts, they'll keep reaching out because of the baby. We don't want their help. We don't want anything to do with them. Nicole has been on drugs, and Nicole has burglarized my mother's home 2 times now for drugs. Nicole doesn't have any fucking money. Nicole can't get a fucking job because of this shit. And what did she... The only thing Nicole did wrong, she had an affair with a man that was married. Nicole was not a married woman. He was a married man. That's that. He was saying he was going to leave his wife. They were separated. He said they didn't even sleep in the same rooms. You're acting like... You motherfuckers act like Nicole ruined a marriage and all this bullshit. No, she didn't. And he was already stepping outside. They were swinging. They were swingers. So, you know, they were already fucking men. So I don't even... That shit's crazy. And it's all gonna come out. And if Chris would have went to court, it all would have came out. You know? And then maybe you guys wouldn't be fucking harassing Nicole. And you would harass the people that you need to harass. If you want to know what you will call the fucking truth. Because Nicole was not involved. You need to look at the people the closest to them.
It was quiet in the records room at the Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. The kind of sterile, eerie silence that only exists in prison walls. The hum of fluorescent lights, the occasional buzz of a sliding steel door. But buried within one of the monitored inmate phone logs was a call. One that would reopen old wounds and baffle investigators all over again. The voice was unmistakable, calm, measured, almost emotionless. Chris Watts. The man who strangled his pregnant wife Shanann and then smothered his two young daughters, Bella and Celeste, before dumping their bodies at an oil site like yesterday's trash. A man serving multiple life sentences with no possibility of parole. And yet, from behind bars, Watts still found ways to twist the knife. This time, it wasn't a confession. It wasn't remorse. It was a question. He wanted to know. About a baby. Not his own. He was asking about Nicole Kessinger's cousin's baby. It was a brief call, one that slid through the cracks. But when investigators stumbled on it months later, they were stunned. Why was Chris Watts, a convicted family annihilator, calling to inquire about the birth of a baby tied to Nicole Kessinger, the woman he was having an affair with when he murdered his entire family? Was it guilt, obsession, manipulation, or something even darker? This is not just another retelling of the Watts family murders. This is about what came after. About a killer's lingering control, a disturbing connection, and a prison call that shook even the most hardened detectives. To the outside world, the Watts family was picture perfect. Shanann Watts was vibrant, ambitious, and fiercely devoted to her family. Her Facebook page told the story of a woman who adored her daughters and doted on her husband. She shared everything, from family vacations to bedtime routines. Her smile was radiant. Her love for Chris seemed unwavering. Chris Watts, by contrast, was quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of man you wouldn't look at twice in a crowd. He worked long shifts as an operator at Anadarko Petroleum. He seemed like a steady, reliable presence. Shanann often praised him online as the best dad ever. He appeared content, loyal, grounded. But appearances are deceiving. Behind the curated social media posts and the smiling selfies was a marriage unraveling. Financial pressures were mounting. Their home was on the brink of foreclosure. They were drowning in debt. And then, without Shanann knowing, Chris began slipping away into something darker. Her name was Nicole Kessinger, a coworker, intelligent, athletic, and enigmatic. Nicole and Chris started an affair in the summer of 2018. What began as casual soon turned serious. Obsessively so. Chris began losing weight, changing his appearance, ignoring calls from Shanann, reading self-help books on how to restart your life. Shanann was 5 months pregnant with their third child. Chris was planning a new life without her. Nicole claimed she didn't know he was still married. Others aren't so sure. But what no one saw, what even the closest friends missed, was that Chris wasn't just planning to leave. He was erasing. The man who once kissed his daughters goodnight, was now fantasizing about life without them. You're watching Dark Corner True Crime. Tap the like button if you're drawn into this story. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the worst is still to come. Looking back, the warning signs weren't just there. They were screaming. But like many tragedies, they were only heard after it was far too late. Chris Watts had changed. He wasn't just distant, he was cold. Texts from Shanann went unanswered. Her calls often rang out. On a business trip in Arizona, just weeks before her death, Shanann confided in friends that something was wrong. Chris wasn't touching her. He wasn't looking at her the same way. She felt rejected, invisible. She poured her heart into one last handwritten letter, left on his nightstand. A plea, prayer, a desperate attempt to save a man who was already gone. Meanwhile, Chris was spending more time with Nicole Kessinger. The two were Googling wedding dresses, searching for apartments, planning vacations, and just days before the murders, Nicole searched something chilling. Can people delete entire phone conversations? At home, Shanann's father noticed something too. He later recalled that Chris didn't seem right. No eye contact, no warmth toward his own kids. Bella and Celeste, just 4 and 3, would try to climb on him, and he'd just sit there. It was as if he had already detached. But even as his lies multiplied, Chris maintained the illusion. To his coworkers, he was calm, polite, normal. To Shanann, he insisted nothing was wrong. To Nicole, he promised a future. And then came the moment that haunts investigators to this day. A friend of Shanann's sent a text, joking that she'd find out if Chris was cheating. Chris replied, "Haha, you'll be surprised." No one knew that within days, his surprise would come in the form of silence. And a shallow grave. August 13th, 2018. The quiet Colorado night carried no warning of the horror unfolding inside the Watts home. Shanann had just returned from a business trip, exhausted but excited to be back with her girls. Security footage captured her stepping onto the front porch in the early hours of the morning. She would never be seen alive again. Inside, Chris Watts was already awake. He later claimed it was a conversation that triggered everything. But what happened next wasn't a moment of passion. It was deliberate, calculated, cold. Shanann was strangled in her own bed by the man she trusted the most. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a baby boy they had already named Nico. Chris ended her life with his bare hands, then dragged her body down the stairs while his daughters watched. They were still alive, and they had seen it all. But the nightmare didn't end there. He drove them, still alive, 45 minutes to an oil field owned by his company. Shanann's body was shoved into a shallow grave. Then, the unthinkable. Chris smothered Celeste with a blanket while Bella sat nearby. And when he turned to Bella, she looked up at him and asked, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece?" That was her last question. The final words Chris heard from his daughter weren't screams. They were, "Daddy, no." He stuffed their small bodies into crude oil tanks. Dark, industrial tombs not meant for human remains. They would be found days later, submerged in petroleum. He then went to work, like nothing happened, smiling, laughing, texting Nicole. This is Dark Corner True Crime. Like and subscribe if this story chills you to the core. Because next, we uncover the cracks in his mask. And the call that changed everything. By 1:40 p.m. on August 13th, Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson had already called the police. Shanann missed a doctor's appointment. Her phone was off. The front door was locked, and there was no sign of the girls. Something was wrong. She knew it. Officers arrived and began the welfare check. Chris showed up soon after. Calm, flat, almost too casual. He let them in. Shanann's purse, her phone, her medications, they were all there. But she wasn't. Neither were Bella and Celeste. Chris claimed she left with the kids after a fight. But nothing about his demeanor made sense. No urgency. No emotion. Surveillance footage from a neighbor across the street showed Chris backing his truck into the driveway early that morning. Unusual for his routine. He told police he had loaded tools for work. The video showed no tools. But the outline of a body was visible. The neighbor later whispered to police, "He's not acting right. He's fidgety. He's never like this." Investigators dug in fast. Chris agreed to interviews, then failed a polygraph. Within 24 hours, his calm began to crack. He was brought back for questioning. This time, he didn't come alone. Nicole Kessinger had already contacted the police. She had found out Shanann and was pregnant, and she was furious. Nicole told detectives she had no idea Chris was still married. She searched online for news about Shanann's disappearance. She deleted texts. She cleared her browser. But she also said something chilling. "If he was able to lie to me and hide all this, what else is he capable of?" Then came the breaking point. Chris asked to speak to his father. Alone. And in a flat voice, he confessed. "I killed Shanann." He blamed her for the deaths of the girls. Said she did it and he reacted. But detectives knew better. The autopsy would later prove that wasn't true. Still, there was one piece of the puzzle that investigators didn't see coming. Prison phone call. One that would surface weeks later. A call where Chris Watts asked about a baby connected to Nicole Kessinger's cousin. A question so strange, so unsettling, it raised suspicions all over again. The courtroom was silent, tight with grief, rage, and a tension so thick it felt suffocating. On November 19, 2018, Chris Watts stood before a judge to be sentenced for the brutal murders of his pregnant wife Shanann and his two daughters, Bella and Celeste. There would be no trial. Just days earlier, Chris had pled guilty to all 9 charges against him. 3 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of killing a child under 12, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a dead body. In exchange, the death penalty was taken off the table. Some say he pled guilty to avoid the agony of trial. Others believe it was to keep even darker secrets from surfacing, like his final phone calls, or questions about Nicole Kessinger that remained unanswered. But what happened in that courtroom was unforgettable. Shanann's family gave victim impact statements. Her father, trembling, called Chris a monster, and said the only reason they agreed to spare his life was because Shanann didn't believe in the death penalty. Her brother, through tears, said, "You heartless monster. You carried them out like trash." When it was his turn to speak, Chris said nothing. Not a word. No apology. No remorse. Just silence. Judge Marcelo Kopkow didn't hold back. He called the crime the most inhumane and vicious he had ever seen. Then he handed down 5 life sentences, 3 without the possibility of parole, plus 84 additional years. Chris Watts was shackled and led away to spend the rest of his life in a concrete cell. No wife, no daughters, no future. But behind prison walls, the story wasn't over. Because somewhere in that cold, gray prison, Chris was still thinking about Nicole, still asking about her family, still obsessed with a life he destroyed. And one call, about a baby that wasn't his, left investigators chilled to the core. You're watching Dark Corner True Crime. Subscribe now to go deeper into this chilling aftermath. Because what came next was something no one expected. Online theorists began targeting Nicole Kessinger. Some believed she knew more. Others claimed Chris was protecting her with his guilty plea. Nicole vanished from the public eye, reportedly changing her name and entering witness protection. But whispers followed her. Every now and then, a post or leaked letter would reignite the flames. One letter, allegedly written by Chris from prison, described vivid dreams of his family, of Shanann, of Nico, the unborn son. In one line, he wrote, "She visits me at night. She's not angry, but she doesn't speak." That haunted silence carried through the Rzusek family. They begged for peace, for space, for dignity. But peace is hard to find when the world keeps asking questions. Like why Chris Watts, now isolated in prison, made that strange call, asking about a baby tied to the woman he destroyed his family for. Years have passed, but the darkness surrounding Chris Watts still lingers. Behind prison walls, stripped of freedom and family, he remains a ghost of the man who once smiled for the cameras. His story, a chilling reminder of how appearances can deceive and how evil can hide in plain sight. But the unanswered questions haunt us all. What drove him to such monstrous acts? Was it jealousy, control, desperation, or something far darker? And what of Nicole Kessinger's role? Was she a victim, an accomplice, or just a ghost in a story too painful to face? The tragedy of the Watts family is a mirror reflecting the fragility of trust, love, and the human mind's darkest corners. It forces us to ask difficult questions about justice, forgiveness, and the true cost of evil. As you sit with these thoughts, consider this. In a world full of secrets, how well do we really know those closest to us? Thank you for watching Dark Corner True Crime. If this story gripped you, please like, share, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay with us as we uncover the darkest truth lurking beneath the surface.